Have you ever imagined being committed to a nursing home against your will, hearing your entire family plotting to get rid of you, and still having the strength to turn things around? Well, that's exactly what happened to a 70-year-old woman who, in the blink of an eye, saw her life turned upside down in the cruelest way possible. They said she was senile, that she was no longer able to take care of herself, that it was better this way. But do you know what nobody expected? That she was completely lucid, hearing every word, every plan, every lie that came out of the mouths of those who should have protected her. This is one of those stories that sounds like a movie script, but I guarantee it's absolutely real. A story of family betrayal, emotional survival, and a revenge so well planned that you'll want to give a standing ovation when you get to the end. Because this woman not only discovered the truth about what they were doing to her, she transformed all that pain into strategy, all that humiliation into strength, and showed that age doesn't define ability, much less dignity. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt that someone close to you underestimated you, thought they could manipulate you because you were vulnerable? Then you will deeply identify with what comes next. And even if you've never experienced anything like this story will make you reflect on loyalty, on family, and on how far some people are capable of going when money and self-interest come into play. What began as an ordinary day in this woman's life ended with her being forcibly placed in a nursing home, while her own family emptied her house, sold her belongings, and celebrated as if they had finally gotten rid of a problem. She, who had dedicated decades to caring for everyone, creating bonds, building a home, was discarded as if she were worthless. But here's the detail that changes everything. She listened. Every whispered conversation in the hallways, every laugh of relief, every malicious comment. And instead of giving in to despair, she decided to wait for the right moment. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might truly surprise you. We're talking about a woman who, even in a completely vulnerable situation, found a loophole, an opportunity, and used her own intelligence to rewrite the ending of her own story. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was successful. And the best part? It was completely legal. This is not just a story of revenge. It's a story of new beginnings, of regained dignity, of living proof that it's never too late to take back control of your own life. It's about showing that respect is not optional, that family isn't about sharing blood, but about demonstrating character. And it's about inspiring anyone, at any age, to refuse to be treated as disposable. So tell me, how do you think she managed to get out of that situation? What did a 70-year-old woman, confined to a nursing home without access to her own possessions, manage to do to turn the tables? The answer will leave you speechless, and more. It will make you believe that justice sometimes really does happen. But before I tell you exactly what she did and how it all unfolded, I need to ask you something. If you're here, following this story with me, it's because it touched something inside you. Maybe you know someone who has been through similar situations. Maybe you yourself have tasted the bitter taste of betrayal from someone you least expected, or maybe you simply believe that stories like this need to be told, shared, so that more people understand the value of dignity at any stage of life. So I'm going to make you an invitation. Leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It can be a word, a reflection, a personal experience. It can even be a question about what you think is coming next. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, people who need to hear these stories, be inspired and strengthened. Every comment, every like you leave, shows that this issue matters, that these voices need to be amplified. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button. Because here, we don't just share stories, we share truths, courage, resilience. And when you subscribe, you're saying, I want to be part of this community. I want more content like this. I believe in the power of these narratives. It's simple, it's quick, but the impact is huge. You help me continue bringing these real moving stories that often no one else has the courage to tell. Now, with you by my side, let's dive right into what happened. Because what this woman planned was simply brilliant. I'm going to tell you now about who this woman really was before everything fell apart. She wasn't fragile, much less dependent. At 70 years old, she still took care of her own house, paid her bills, and made her own decisions. She possessed an enviable mental clarity, the kind of person you talk to and leave thinking, I want to have that lucidity when I reach that age. She had built everything with her own hands, decades of hard work, saving, giving up things to secure her future. Every brick in that house, every piece of furniture, every penny saved was the fruit of real sacrifice, the kind that leaves a mark on the soul. But you know how it is, right? Sometimes we don't realize when things start to change. That's how it was with her. Small signs that, on their own, seemed harmless. A son who started showing up more often, always with an excuse to get an extra key. A granddaughter who suddenly became worried and suggested she sign some papers just to make things easier in the future. Subtle comments about forgetfulness that never happened. Phrases like, Mom, you're confusing things again. And she, trusting, believing that it was care, when in reality, it was the beginning of a silent and calculated manipulation. It's never too late to realize when something is wrong, but sometimes the discovery comes in a brutal way, and that's exactly what happened to her. On a seemingly ordinary day, she was literally caught off guard. They said it was just a routine medical appointment. She got into the car confidently, calmly. When she realized where she was really being taken, it was too late. The nursing home door closed behind her, and, with it, all the freedom she had earned throughout her entire life. What no one expected was that she was completely conscious, lucid, attentive. She heard everything, every word whispered in the hallways, every laugh of relief, every plan being detailed by those who should have been on her side. And it was in that moment of profound pain, of unimaginable betrayal, that something within her awakened. It wasn't despair, it was determination, because she understood that her heritage, her sweat, her history would not be erased just like that, without a fight, and that if no one else would defend her dignity, she herself would do it. Now I want you to understand the real impact of this journey, because what she experienced behind the scenes in that place completely changed how she saw the people around her, and the hidden truth behind this whole situation was even more shocking than she imagined. What if the courage to start over was the true secret to resilience? Comment below. What moment in your life demanded a strength from you that you didn't even know you had? What she didn't immediately realize was that it wasn't genuine concern. It was strategy, a narrative being built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, until it became an accepted truth by everyone around her. And the worst part? She herself began to doubt her own sanity. Because when everyone around you repeats the same story, however absurd it may be, there comes a point when you question your own reality. They knew this, and they used it against her mercilessly. The signs were all there, just masked as familial care. When she mentioned she had put money away in a certain place, someone would immediately comment, Mom, you've already said that 3 times today. When she remembered an important appointment, she would hear, No, that was last week. You're getting confused again. Small lies that, repeated frequently, began to undermine her confidence. And then came the meetings. Those hushed conversations that stopped as soon as she entered the room. The exchanged glances, the exaggerated sighs, the tone of voice laden with a false patience that hurts more than any shout. But the real transformation happened when they decided she needed specialized medical follow-up. Suddenly, doctors she had never seen before appeared, asking tricky questions, noting down answers as if they were building a dossier against her. Simple questions became traps. What day is it today? Do you remember what you ate for breakfast? Any hesitation was transformed into proof of cognitive decline, and she, confused by all that pressure, began to stumble over her own words, giving them exactly what they needed to move forward with the plan. The impact of this silent manipulation was devastating, because it wasn't just about getting her out of the house. It was about destroying her credibility, her autonomy, her very self-perception. It was about ensuring that when the time came for her to be hospitalized, no one would question it. Not the neighbors, not distant friends, not the authorities. After all, everyone already knew that she was too fragile to take care of herself. The narrative was ready, accepted, unquestionable. And when they finally took her to that place, she still tried to argue, to explain that she was fine, that she didn't need to be there. But her words fell on deaf ears, because the decision had already been made a long time ago. The papers had already been signed. The keys to the house had already been handed over. Everything was very fast, very efficient, very well coordinated. They had planned every detail behind the scenes, while she still believed that it was love. Except they made a fatal mistake, a mistake that would change everything, because it's never too late for the truth to come out, and she was about to discover every piece of it in the most painful and enlightening way possible. The day that changed everything began with a simple lie. They said it was just a consultation with a new doctor, a specialist who could help her feel better. She got into the car unsuspecting, believing it was just another one of those routine visits her family insisted on scheduling. But the drive became strange. The streets weren't familiar. The silence inside the car weighed like lead. And when they finally stopped in front of that enormous building with its well-kept gardens and a discreet sign at the entrance, she felt a chill run down her spine. That wasn't a doctor's office. It was a nursing home. She tried to question, tried to understand what was happening, but the answers came evasively, hastily, almost angrily. "It's only for a few days, Mom, until you recover." Recover from what? She wasn't sick. She hadn't fallen. She hadn't had any crisis. But no one seemed interested in hearing what she had to say. They put papers in front of her, pens in hand, spoke too fast for her to process. Signatures were collected. Documents disappeared into folders, and before she could really understand what was happening, the door closed behind her, and her family was already leaving. The impact of that moment was overwhelming. She looked around and saw white corridors, the smell of disinfectant, elderly people sitting in wheelchairs, staring into nothingness. That was where they had decided to put her, without warning, without conversation, without respect. The feeling of betrayal was so intense that she could barely breathe. How could the people she had raised, whom she had loved, whom she had supported her whole life, do this to her? How could they simply discard her as if she were a problem to be solved? And the worst was yet to come. Because in the following days, while she tried to adapt to that new and suffocating routine, she began to hear things, conversations between employees, phone calls that shouldn't have been made in front of her, casual comments that revealed much more than they should. That's how she discovered that her house was being emptied, that her furniture was being sold, that her savings were being transferred, and that all of this was happening with the approval and coordination of her own children. Her mindset shifted instantly, because she realized she couldn't rely on anyone but herself, that the only person capable of reversing the situation was her, and that it's never too late to fight for one's dignity, even when everything seems lost. She began to observe, to mentally note, to gather every piece of information that came to her, every name mentioned, every document cited, every loophole in the system that could be used to her advantage. But what truly motivated her to act wasn't just anger. It was the absolute certainty that she deserved more, that her life had value, that her story wouldn't end that way. And it was this conviction that sparked the most impressive turnaround you could imagine. What if the biggest betrayal of your life was the push you needed to reinvent yourself? Comment below. What situation forced you to discover a strength you didn't even know you had within yourself? It was on one of those nights when the silence of the nursing home seemed even heavier that everything changed completely. She couldn't sleep, too restless with everything that was happening, and decided to walk through the empty corridors, trying to calm her mind. The lighting was dim, just those little emergency lights that make everything seem somewhat ghostly. She walked slowly, almost dragging her slippers across the cold floor, when she heard voices coming from a room next door. Familiar voices. Voices that should have brought comfort, but that at that moment made her blood run cold. She stopped, she leaned against the wall, and she listened to every word with frightening clarity. It was her children. They were there, at that strange hour, talking to someone who seemed to be a lawyer or accountant. And the subject? How to expedite the transfer of her assets. How to liquidate the properties as quickly as possible. How to divide everything before complications arose. They spoke of her as if she were an obstacle, a bureaucratic hurdle that needed to be overcome. There was no affection in those words. There was no guilt. There was haste, greed, and a coldness that cut deeper than any knife. One of them even chuckled when he mentioned how easy it had been to convince the doctor to sign the necessary papers. Another commented that now it was just a matter of time, that in a few weeks everything would be resolved and they could finally move on. Move on. As if she were just a closed chapter. As if decades of love, care, and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. As if she were already dead. And do you know what her reaction was at that moment? She didn't cry. She didn't despair. She didn't bang on the door screaming for explanations. She simply went back to her room, sat on the bed, and for the first time in weeks, felt something different. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was pure determination, because she realized that that conversation, however painful it was exactly the proof she needed. It was confirmation that she wasn't crazy, that she hadn't imagined anything, that all of this was real and premeditated. The transformation that took place within her that night was profound. She ceased to be the confused and frightened victim. She became the strategist, the observer, the woman who knew exactly what she needed to do. And the first thing she did was begin to mentally document everything, every name mentioned in that conversation, every detail about documents and transactions, every loophole she could use to her advantage, because she understood that it's never too late to regain control of your own narrative, even when everyone thinks you've already been silenced. But she also knew she would need help, someone trustworthy who still believed in her, who could act on her behalf while she was trapped in that place. And that's when an even greater revelation emerged, completely changing the course of everything. From that moment on, she became a different person. On the outside, she remained the frail woman everyone expected to see. She nodded when spoken to, smiled vaguely when someone asked how she was feeling, and feigned confusion when important matters were mentioned. But inside, every cog in her mind was working at full speed. She had understood the game, and now she was playing it too, only with far more intelligence than anyone could have imagined. She began to observe everything with heightened attention, the times when the staff changed shifts, who was more attentive, who seemed genuinely concerned about the elderly people there. And that's how she identified Sarah, a young nurse who always stopped to chat, who looked people in the eye, who treated everyone with true respect. It was her she decided to trust, and that decision changed everything. One day when they were alone, she looked at Sarah and said, with a lucidity that surprised the young woman, "I'm not crazy. I don't have dementia. I was brought here against my will, and I need your help." Sarah was silent for a few seconds, processing those words. And then, instead of doubting or calling someone, she sat beside the bed and said, "Tell me everything." It was the beginning of an unlikely but absolutely essential alliance. With Sarah's help, she gained access to information she would never have had on her own. Sarah brought newspapers, allowed her to use the phone at strategic times, and even obtained copies of some documents that had been filed in the nursing home's administration. Each piece of information was a piece of the puzzle she was putting together. She discovered that her children had forged medical reports, manipulated lawyers, and were literally selling everything she owned while she was still alive and conscious. But the most important revelation came when Sarah mentioned that every patient had the legal right to request an independent medical reassessment. It was a loophole in the system, a door that no one expected her to know existed. And it was precisely through that door that she decided to enter. Because it's never too late to use the system to your advantage, especially when it has been used against you so cruelly. The plan was taking shape. Every detail was being carefully calculated. Every move was being thought out 3 steps ahead. She didn't just want to get out of there. She wanted justice. She wanted to expose the truth. She wanted to ensure that those who betrayed her faced the consequences. And most importantly, she wanted to recover not only her possessions, but her dignity, her voice, her freedom. But what no one imagined was that she had a trump card up her sleeve, something that not even her children knew existed. And when that secret came to light, the impact would be devastating. The trump card she held was something simple, yet powerful. A name. The name of someone who truly knew her. Someone who had witnessed her lucidity over the years, who had taken care of her legal affairs when she was still in charge of everything herself. It was Jonathan, a lawyer who had worked with her decades ago, helping her structure her investments, her documents, her financial security. They hadn't spoken in a while, but she knew he would remember her. And more importantly, She knew he would believe her. With Sarah's help, she managed to make that call. The phone rang 3 times before the familiar voice answered on the other end. And when she said who it was, there was an immediate silence of recognition. Jonathan asked how she was, and she bluntly replied, "I'm in a nursing home. I was put here against my will. My children are stealing everything I've built, and I need you to come see me. Urgently." The directness with which she spoke eliminated any doubt about her mental state. This was the same determined woman he had known years before. Jonathan showed up 2 days later. He entered the nursing home as an ordinary visitor, but he brought with him a discreet recording and documents she never imagined were still accessible. They talked for hours. She recounted every detail: the manipulations, the bribed doctors, the forged documents, the conversation she had overheard in the hallway. And Jonathan, as he listened, took notes, identifying every legal irregularity, every point that could be contested. The expression on his face oscillated between indignation and admiration for her courage. The first strategic decision was to immediately revoke all powers of attorney that had been granted to the children. Jonathan explained that if she was lucid and capable of making decisions, those documents could be annulled with her signature and confirmation from an independent doctor, and he already had one in mind, someone he completely trusted, who could attest to her full cognitive capacity. The next step would be to cancel any access the family had to her assets, bank accounts, properties, investments. Everything would be blocked until the situation was clarified in court. But Jonathan went further. He suggested they formally file a complaint for attempted misappropriation of an elderly person's assets. It was a serious crime with severe consequences, and with the evidence she had, especially the testimonies of the nursing home staff who witnessed suspicious conversations, there was a solid case. The journey back to freedom was beginning, and this time, with all the legal tools on her side. While all of this was being planned behind the scenes, the family continued acting normally, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to strike them. They sold furniture, transferred money, celebrated amongst themselves as if they had won. But it's never too late for the truth to emerge, and when it did, there would be no turning back. What if you discovered that you were underestimated by the very people who should have valued you? Write in the comments, what was the biggest lesson that betrayal taught you about who you really are? The day everything came to light was cinematic. Jonathan had prepared each document with surgical precision. The powers of attorney were revoked on a Thursday morning. The bank accounts were frozen soon after. And then, as the icing on the cake, the children received a formal notification. They were being investigated for attempted embezzlement, falsification of medical documents, and financial abuse of an elderly person. The ground collapsed beneath their feet in a matter of minutes. The reaction was exactly what you would imagine: absolute panic. They frantically called the lawyer who had helped them, who suddenly became unavailable. They tried to access the accounts and discovered they no longer had permission. They rushed to the house they were selling and found a court-ordered seal preventing any transaction. And then, in desperation, they did what they had never done since placing her there. They went to visit her at the nursing home. They arrived agitated, demanding to speak with her immediately. Sarah led them to the drawing room with a discreet smile that cleverly concealed her satisfaction. And when they entered, what they saw left them completely disconcerted. She was seated in an armchair, dressed with dignity, her hair neatly arranged, her posture erect. There was nothing fragile or confused about her. Her eyes were clear, focused, and carried an intensity they hadn't seen in a long time, or perhaps they had never truly noticed them before. They began to speak at the same time, trying to explain, justify, blame others. But she raised her hand, asking for silence, and in that simple gesture lay an authority that could not be ignored. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, firm, without a hint of tremor. "You believed I was senile, that I no longer understood anything, that you could do whatever you wanted to me without me noticing." She paused, letting each word hang in the air. "But I heard everything, every conversation, every plan, every lie." The silence that followed was deafening. They tried to deny it, but she continued, now with a tone that mixed pain and strength. "Old doesn't mean stupid, and you confused patience with weakness." It was at that moment that they understood. There was no going back. No excuse would work. No manipulation could undo what had been done. She had defeated them using the very same tools they had tried to use against her: intelligence, strategy, and the law. The impact of that revelation was devastating for them, because it wasn't just about losing the money. It was about being exposed. It was about facing the public and legal consequences of their actions. And even more painful, it was about them realizing that they had completely underestimated the person who raised them. Now comes the part that many people want to know. What happened after this confrontation? How did she rebuild her life? And most importantly, what became of those who plotted against her? After that confrontation, things moved quickly. With the independent medical evaluation confirming her full mental capacity, there was no longer any legal justification for keeping her in the nursing home. Jonathan provided all the necessary documentation, and on a sunny Tuesday morning, she walked out the front door. Not as a frail patient being carried, but as a free woman, walking on her own 2 feet, carrying a small bag and a discreet smile that concealed a profound transformation. The house she reclaimed was empty. Her children had sold almost everything before the court order to freeze it. But you know what? That didn't shake her as much as it should have, because she realized that those pieces of furniture, those objects, were just things. What really mattered, she still had: her mind, her strength, her freedom. And with that, she could rebuild everything. Not the way it was before, but the way she always wanted to and never had the courage to do. The first decision she made was something she had postponed her whole life: to travel. Not obligatory trips to visit relatives or deal with bureaucracy. Real trips, the kind that nourished the soul. She bought tickets to places she had always dreamed of visiting: mountains, beaches, historic cities. Each destination was a celebration of her own existence, a silent declaration that it's never too late to live the experiences you deserve. But she didn't stop there. She went back to studying. She enrolled in courses that interested her, not because she needed certificates or professional validation, but simply because she was curious. Art, history, even technology. Her mind was more active than ever, and she noticed with satisfaction how each new learning experience made her feel alive in a way she had forgotten years ago. And then came the most significant decision. She began to use her own experience to help others. She contacted organizations that support elderly victims of financial and emotional abuse. She offered her testimony, her journey, as proof that it is possible to react, defend oneself, rebuild. She became a kind of silent mentor to those who felt invisible, discarded, voiceless. And in doing so, she transformed all that pain into purpose. For the first time in her life, she was taking care of herself without guilt, without that feeling that she should be doing something for someone else, that her own desires were secondary. She learned that self-love is not selfishness, that setting boundaries is not cruelty, that preserving her peace is not weakness, and that starting over at 70 is not only possible, but can be the most powerful chapter of an entire existence. But a crucial part of this story is still missing. What happened to those who plotted against her? What was the real price they paid for their choices? Because justice, when it finally arrives, has a unique flavor. The consequences for the family were severe and unavoidable. The legal process ran its course, and the evidence was simply irrefutable. The falsified medical reports, the manipulated powers of attorney, the suspicious financial transactions, everything came to light publicly and humiliatingly. They tried to claim they had good intentions, that they were concerned about her well-being, but the conversation she had overheard that night in the nursing home hallway, which had been corroborated by witnesses, destroyed any attempt at justification. The lawyer who helped them lost his license. The children were ordered to return everything they had taken, with interest and fines. But the real punishment didn't come from the courts. It came from their own conscience and social judgment. Friends distanced themselves. The community began to look at them with contempt. That image of a united and caring family completely crumbled. And worst of all, they forever lost the chance to genuinely reconcile with their mother. Because betrayal of that magnitude cannot be erased with apologies or time. She, on the other hand, blossomed in a way no one expected. In her 70s, she was living with an intensity that many young people don't even dream of having. Each morning was a conscious choice to honor her own existence. Every decision was made thinking about what made her happy, not what others expected of her. And you know what's most beautiful? She didn't carry resentment. She wasn't trapped in the past. She simply moved forward, lighter, wiser, more complete. This story teaches us something fundamental that society insists on forgetting. Never underestimate someone because of their age. Time may mark the body. It may leave wrinkles and gray hair, but it also strengthens something much more powerful than muscles. It strengthens courage. It strengthens wisdom. It strengthens the ability to see beyond appearances and lies. And when someone with decades of life decides to fight, that fight carries a weight that few can bear. The pain she felt when she discovered the betrayal didn't magically disappear. She transformed it into strength. The blow she suffered didn't destroy her. It became a new beginning. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. It's never too late to rewrite your story, to take a stand, to demand the respect you deserve. Age doesn't diminish your worth. It doesn't silence your voice. It doesn't take away your right to live with dignity. This woman proved that resilience has no expiration date, that justice, sometimes, really does happen, and that starting over can be the most revolutionary act there is, regardless of how many years you've lived. But now, I want to hear from you, because this story doesn't end here. It continues every time someone chooses not to accept being diminished, every time someone decides to fight for what is right, every time someone transforms pain into purpose. Comment below. This inspired me. If this story touched something real within you and made you believe that new beginnings are possible at any age. If you've made it this far with me, I know this story has touched you in some way. And look, I don't create this kind of content just to tell pretty stories. I do it because I believe there are truths that need to be told, that need to circulate, that need to reach those who really need to hear them. And you being here now means we're connected on the same frequency. So I'm going to make you a sincere invitation. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that button now. Because here we don't romanticize life, we show it as it is. With its challenges, its twists and turns, its improbable victories. And if this story touched you, imagine how many others are waiting for you in the next videos. And so I know you really stayed with me until the end. Leave a comment saying, "This message was for me." Because I read it, I see it. And that's, what shows me it's worth continuing to bring this kind of content to you. Oh, and if this video made sense, leave a like. Not for the algorithm, not to inflate the numbers, but because it's the simplest way for you to tell me, I saw it, I felt it, and it mattered. And before you leave, there's a video over there that perfectly complements what we talked about today. Click on it and stay with me there, because this journey is just beginning. See you next time.